Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this edition of Cross-Section Conversations. Our subject today is the shifting sands in South Asia. And while I was thinking of shifting sands, I also thought sifting mirages from reality. Sifting mirages from reality, the shifting sands in South Asia. We have a very august, it's not a pun on the month that we are in, but it's a very august gathering that we have here. Very distinguished panelists. I'll start from Admiral Anil Chopra, accomplished in being a very rare officer who has commanded both the Eastern Command and the Western Command. And he relinquished government service, being Director General of the India Coast.
So that was before.
That was
Before that.
And Anil is NDA, National Defense College, distinguished fellow with various think tanks, including the Observer Research Foundation, and also Vivekanand, and presently also spending more of his time with the Delhi Policy Group. Ms. Rami Desai, nice to have you with us first time. Distinguished fellow at the India Foundation. I heard her this May at the Kasauli festival, where Lieutenant General Kamal Dawar had convened a very high-powered gathering of eminent personalities, and Rami was speaking there, and I was quite impressed with her breadth of knowledge. She is specializing in conflict management, close student of the neighborhood, and eminently suited for our discussion today. Major General Jagatbir Singh, also happening from my college. We'll not mention the name of the college because we'll leave that aside. But Jagatbir is a prolific writer with us, and he's I just want to go back to, he has held various command positions, staff and instructional appointments, served in various terrains, served in the UN peacekeeping mission as a military observer in Iraq and Kuwait. He has been an instructor to the Indian Military Academy and the Defense Services Staff College, Wellington. So thank you, Jagat, for being here with us. Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya. Gautam is formerly ambassador to Myanmar, Afghanistan, and also Syria, and specializing also, I think, in Myanmar-centric situations. I think you've been spending a fair amount of time on think tanks and discussions happening in that region, which is also a great area of concern to us, as I think, in India. Air Vice Marshal Rajeev Hora, fighter pilot, test pilot, worked across the Army, Navy, and industry, was the team leader for inducting the Hawk aircraft in India. He's an avid blogger and a most perceptive commentator. His blogs are really fun to read, and they're so incisive at times. They're really the cutting edge. So maybe if you haven't had a chance, you should get on to, what is it called?
The blog is actually, my consultancy is Sikh mediation.
Sikh mediation.
Sikh mediation and conflict resolution, really. And but within that is this blog, Freedom of Thought. So a blog for free thinkers who don't mind laughing along the way. Yeah.
Our friend Kamal Malhotra, currently distinguished visiting professor at the Nalsar University in Hyderabad, was with Boston University Global Development Policy Center as non-resident senior fellow, management consultant with international think tanks, worked with the United Nations as its head in Malaysia, Turkey, and Vietnam, a senior advisor with UNDP, and now the crowning his career as a big contributor to cross-section. So,
Thank you.
Welcome, Kamal, to this. And also for all of you who are the Navy, Army, Air Force, father, a very distinguished Army officer, And Kamal, would you like to just share, because we always want to look up to our parents, and just two quick lines on your late father.
Well, he was the first Indian adjutant in the IMA, and he retired as the Army Commander of Northern Command in Kashmir.
SP Malhotra.
Smoky
I know Smoky.
So there we are. So starting with this discussion today, shifting hands in South Asia. Last few months, I think we have noticed, all of us know very well, certain turnarounds, what you thought was not conceivable, suddenly coming to pass. There's a gentleman called Field Marshal Munir, who suddenly is erupted on the scene. I'm wondering whether he's the new go-between President Xi and President Trump, because he keeps flitting from one capital to the other. What kind of play is happening in the United States? Unconceivable. I asked Kamal Malhotra the other day on the phone that this is not the America we know. And this is America which has come to pass, where just about every country is being challenged, friend, foe, whatever. And suddenly, not only we are at the receiving end, but we are also finding that he's causing up to everybody else around us. And one other thing which we all know again, that when we had a coup in Bangladesh and Sheikh Hasina was ousted, the first things we heard was that the new incumbent is a prodigy of Hillary Clinton, and there's an American influence happening there. And then we found that China has also come into Bangladesh, and now we find Pakistan causing up to China. CPEC Phase 2 launched just a few days ago, and President Trump's family is very busy on the cryptocurrency field. What's happening? So, can I ask, from a political standpoint, from a defense standpoint, because we seem to be challenged at this point in time. So, Anil, would you like to start from a naval perspective? Where do you see any new threats, any changes that you foresee happening on our seas?
Well, I believe that any downturn on trade relations will affect other things also. I am not so sure Quad Summit will be held this year. I think it should be held, but we are the hosts and we are supposed to get on with the business of getting the Quad Summit going. Under the present circumstances, I don't see this happening for at least another couple of months. But it's important for us because that is the only, shall I say, interface with the developed navies of some of the developed navies of the world. We don't interact with Chinese and Russian navies, so we don't get any interoperability best practices which we pick up from these navies. So purely from the naval point of view, it's important for Quad and Malabar to carry on. But I don't see it happening. And I already in the media we have heard about things like the second batch of P8Is being cancelled or put on hold. So P8Is were an important, very important part of surveillance of the entire Indian Ocean from Africa to Malacca. And we have 12 from the United States, and we were buying 6 more. Now whether we buy them or not is open. So, from the naval perspective, 1, it may affect our procurements. 2, it will probably lead to less interaction with the United States Navy and consequently maybe with the other navies, at least in the immediate future. I personally think this whatever has happened for whatever reason is going to affect broad spectrum, multi-sectoral relationship on many fronts, unless it is sorted out in the next few months, which I don't know whether it can happen. From the naval perspective, ever since the regime change in Bangladesh, the Chinese have lost no time they were already supplying 76% of all military hardware to Bangladesh. They have upped that, and very soon Bangladesh already is a vassal state, much like Pakistan, in fact more than Pakistan. So we've been talking about 1.5, 2.5, 3.5 front wars. But I think what we all agree, at least in the military, is now we are fighting a single front with three possible adversaries. One front covering from Pakistan to Bangladesh, all supplied by China, all having Chinese arms, all having Chinese command and control and other systems. This is a very serious affair. I don't know how many people actually understand this, the seriousness of where we are at the moment. And China may now sort out what we're talking about, delineation of boundaries and all, but they have no, in all this new bonhomie, they're not gone back on not claiming Arunachal Pradesh. They're not, 1 month ago, they're still naming new villages in Arunachal Pradesh. So the power differential between China and India, the military power differential, the economic power differential, the technological power differential, is now quite considerable. And I think it'll be quite a challenge to our government and to everybody as to how do you deal with this power differential when, if your ties with the US go south for a long time. Because since we don't have the capacity and capability, despite our best efforts, we don't have the economic power to be able to quickly reach that standard. So we have a problem. And the Bangladesh Navy, since you were talking about the Navy, people ask me which is the Chinese bases in the Indian Ocean. And I used to say Karachi only. All this Hambantota and all that is useless. But what they've done in Karachi is they have built up repair and maintenance facilities for the same type of ships which they will deploy into the Indian Ocean, which they are giving to Pakistan. So naval ships, when they go into a base, you're not looking for just fuel and khana and R&R. You need repairs on your weapon systems, sensors. You need to replenish your missiles, your ammunition. A naval base is not just something you just go to. So now Karachi has become a full-fledged Chinese naval base. And I think Chittagong, one of the ones that are being developed in Bangladesh, is also going to be achieved. Now, we may be whatever we are, but to handle this sort of naval, beginnings of naval power in the Bay of Bengal, in the Arabian Sea, and with the PLA Navy, I'm not making, actually, I don't want to make it sound, oh God, things are terrible, but we must be cognizant. We must be cognizant as to what is happening on our immediate borders, which is Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, without the US now necessarily backing. And we also have problems with Nepal and Bhutan, with both. In fact, even with Bhutan, we never had any issues with. Recently, the ties have taken a downturn. Maybe you'll be able to tell us why exactly, but there's not the same bonhomie. So, my reading of the situation is it's a challenge. It need not be bleak. It will depend a lot on our wisdom, and a lot in what somebody just said, in recognizing reality and not being delusional about our own capabilities.
Since we are on defense, Air Marshal, would you like to talk about the skies that we are under?
Yeah. Okay. I think first we look at the geopolitical skies before we look at our virtual skies. As I quite endorse that we are at the moment, I would call it an inflamed neighborhood. Suja hua. You don't know when this is going to turn toxic, when this is going to come up. When this tariff war and the US symbolically, virtually, and reality is pulling away, so it makes you a little weak. Between the China, US, India triangle, we always thought we were in balance. Now this has imbalanced you. Now with this imbalance, it makes you vulnerable. And if I go back to the Prince Machiavelli, the moment a state is weak, the neighboring state will attack. I'm not saying it's happening, but this is wisdom. That be prepared, you become much more vulnerable. And accordingly, we've just learned our lessons from Sindoor. We just learned the lessons from Ukraine. A huge amount of investment will have to be made. Now, as you said, it's not one front, two front. It is the entire front which has to be catered for. So one is obviously re-looking at your theatre command concept, because you, whatever resources you have, you always fight with what you have. You need to centralize resources. Call it whatever you may, clothe it whichever way you want, but war will have to be centralized. With the resources, huge investment will have to go into the Air Force, because shifting from the north to the east to the west, with the current what you have, it is known the numbers that you need to have and the numbers which we have. It's not rocket science. This calculation not rocket science. It is very, very simplistic. So we need to play our cards, very, very clearly at this moment. No rhetoric, no nothing. Build up capability and keep your ammunition hot.
Right.
General Jagat,
Sir,
from an army
from
standpoint.
an army point of view, this, almost the same situation. It is the same. So one thing always stands out, that as far as our land borders are concerned, wherever you look, there's nowhere to go out. So the only option was the sea. And Sir's talked to you about the sea, because one side you have Pakistan, the other side you have China, third side you have Nepal, but you can go just little bit in Nepal. After that again you come across China, and the other side you have Myanmar leading way. So if you look at it, your entire borders are. And what has happened right since independence, we've been engaged in some manner or the other in each of our borders. Sometime, and because of that, unfortunately, our focus has always been changing. So earlier you said you don't need an army at independence. Then you were confronted with 47, 48. You fought over there. Then you started building up. Then you had the problem with China. Suddenly you pushed all the way towards, all your formations eastward. Until now the Navy had not come into play. And in 62 the Air Force also never came into play. Then you have now 60 years of 65, when Pakistan felt that it was time to take advantage of India, because it had been weakened after the 62 war, and because the Prime Minister had passed away, Nehru, and they were part of, CENTO and SEATO, so they decided, and of course the nuclear device had been exploded by China in 64, so they said they'll take advantage. So at that time, who came to your aid? That time both India and Pakistan were buying Western equipment. After that they put sanctions. We went towards Soviet Union, they went towards China. So you had this problem. 71 was a little different, because that time all three services were in play. And after that, the minute General Sundarji came in and you did brass tacks and all, after that Zia played this master card of his in the form of igniting the valley. So since then we've always been pushed into where, in what manner are you fighting? Now suddenly you switched, you said that our major formations should now, instead of looking westward, they are pointing in the eastward direction. So weaken this. And as Sir rightly brought up, if you look at it as one consolidated threat, and you're looking at moving your formations in different places all over, at some point you'll have an issue. Now he talked of Ukraine war. There are many lessons from Ukraine and other things, but what has come out from these two conflicts, which I feel is, and that's where we are going to have a problem, is that one of these things what has come out very clearly is that a person who's a member of the UN Security Council, or someone who's got unconditional support of a member of the UN Security Council, can get away with anything. So you've seen what's happened in Russia, and you've seen what's happened in Israel. Now as far as India is concerned, who was its friend who gave it unconditional support in the UN Security Council? It was Russia. Now you're targeting Russia. Whatever we say, Sir talked of inventory of Bangladesh, 73.6% being of Chinese origin. Pakistan is in the 90s, sir, if I'm not mistaken. Our bulk of our inventory was still Soviet. So whatever we say, will your spares keep flowing? You got your S-400s. It still hasn't been completed, the amount they had to give you because of Ukraine war. Other spares, will they come? And now you're going towards America to pick up aircraft, to pick up naval systems and other things. But if you're having a problem with tariffs, will this affect defense spares? Will it affect defense ties? I feel it will definitely affect all this. So today you're in a little precarious position, and as everybody said, until you build your own capacity, until you build your own capability, and you can't fight with other people's templates. You have to have, look at it from your point of view. So that is a challenge which we have today. So I don't think we can, this meeting with China is very good, reaching out to China. It's a good thing because they're trying to diffuse certain tensions along the LAC. But two things stand out. The foreign minister went, I think one of the main aims of his coming to India was to invite the Prime Minister to SCO. He was wondering, especially after the problem that took place when the RM went there and never the declaration wasn't signed because we raised certain issues. I think one of the issues was to get the PM to attend SCO. After that, he visited Afghanistan, where I think they want to extend the CPEC. And then he visited Pakistan. And in Pakistan, he made two statements.
Massive statements.
Massive statement. One is that when he was asked, you visited 3 countries, he said the third stop is the most final and most important. And the other thing he said is the army is the ballast of national security. So, like you said, sir, Munir is being moved by both. I mean, he's the go-between or whatever, but he's been invited to the White House and he's been invited to Beijing often. So, where are we today? I think, like you said, Trump is coming, things have changed. He's, wanting to grab headlines with a statement. Very variable in his behavior, so no one knows where they stand. And
briefly, just say on the military side.
Yes, sir.
I think all of us are in agreement that it is a precarious situation at the moment. Primarily because our defense industrial base is immature. It cannot still provide anything which is reasonably high-tech in the amount of time. It's got tremendous time and cost overruns. If we had the private sector more actively involved in the defense industrial base for the last 40, 50 years from earlier governments, then maybe we would have been in a position. But what do we do today? We don't have the capacity to arm ourselves with the kind of high-tech weaponry that we need.
Tell me one simple, I'm a non-specialist of the group. With all this emergency that we have on our back right now, do you see that the Made in India and Make in India program may have to be given a little pass or pause?
No.
Because where will we go? Like
No,
you
because
said,
if you're going to keep insisting on Make in India,
but where will
then
you
how are we going to
So,
arm ourselves,
where-
which we need as of today?
Can I answer that? Where are you going to go? If you don't want to go to America, you can't go to China. Russians are in no position to supply you. They haven't given the 5th S-400 as yet, the 4th. They don't have the capacity to do what the Soviets did. Russia is not the Soviet Union. We still haven't figured that out. They're not capable as the Soviet Union was to be able to supply us. Do you think Israel will carry on supplying us, or the EU if the American pressure comes in then? So if you can't get from anywhere, it would have been okay if we had our own industry. But our own industry is making low-end products, from boots to uniforms to some component supply chain of some other person. Nobody in this country is making from scratch, a full-fledged platform totally indigenously. Our ships are well made in India, but the sensors and weapons are still coming from abroad. The aircraft are being made in a chain, but many of the sensors
The
Engines are, like you take a simple thing like a tank engine. The Arjun was to come in the 70s. It's come in now, only 2 regiments. And that too, you haven't gone ahead. And out of the, you can say in a forum openly, on the newspapers and all, that it's an indigenous production. But how do you call a thing indigenous? Where does the engine come from? Germany. Where does the transmission, the suspension system come from? Germany. Where does the night sights and the sights come from? France. So these are all things. What do you manufacture in India? So, these are the problems.
From the Air Force side, the very important thing is, in the last 10 years, a great deal of inventory has come from the United States of America. or C-17, C-130, the
Entire
Cobras,
logistics chain.
logistic chain.
Apache.
Now you got to watch out for the supply chains. Now, if those supply chains get affected, it is immediately impacting your capability. That is something we have to keep a close guard, because what you have will last only this
But I don't think the Americans, I don't think we have already contracted. Americans are pretty good with contracts.
They won't
know
go back.
If they go back on the contract, they will lose credibility forever. I don't think the Americans are going to. Americans mean we don't deal with the government, we deal with the private companies. So those companies will continue to supply what is contracted for. In my assessment, I may be wrong.
Like a simple.
But getting more technology and new technology. The trouble with China is not just the capacity. Capacity is first level. Capabilities. I mean, the capabilities in AI and space in particular, they are now in level with the United States. So they are in fact becoming proper,
Alternative.
So where are we going to get this capacity? By saying DRDO can't do it, private industry doesn't have the, so where do we go? We seem to have got ourselves into a bit of a spot, primarily because our own defense industry is not.
How much of this has got aggravated with President Trump's tariff wars?
I don't think President Trump, I look at President Trump from his domestic agenda. President Trump, if you study him, and forget the personality, his basic focus is on changing America, what has happened in his perception of America. So it's that focus on his domestic front. One of the things he wants to do is to bring down that $37 trillion debt. For that, he needs to do many things. I think tariffs is part of that. Where we have got affected because of what has happened in the saying in Russian oil, there's nothing that we can do about it now. That's finished and over with. But it'll be interesting to see whether our trade agreement now goes through. In the immediate next few months, we're supposed to do a Quad summit with Trump coming here. We're supposed to do an FTA. We are supposed to do many things which were signed up for in February. We're supposed to do a new 10-year defense framework. It's September. Hello?
Just 4 months left.
Kamal, would you comment now on the Trump's tariff wars, and then we'll move to the diplomatic side and give a chance to Ajay also to join by then.
Yeah, so on Trump's tariffs, he has a very old-fashioned, what we economists call a mercantilist view of trade, which goes back to the 19th century. Okay, his heroes are Alexander Hamilton and President William McKinley, the United States. Now, tariffs at that time were used in a very mercantilist way. That is a very different period from now. So Trump is doing a lot of self-harm to the United States. The only winner is going to be China. And the acceleration of China's rise is essentially being facilitated by the United States in many ways, but one major way is through the tariffs and his tariff wars. Because if you look at all the data now, it is now beginning to become clear even to non-economists that you're going to have three things happening simultaneously leading up to 2026 in the US. One is lower economic growth, in fact, negative economic growth leading to a recession, increased unemployment, and increased inflation, what we call stagflation. This has not happened in the United States since the OPEC oil crisis of the 1970s. Now, when it comes to South Asia, basically South Asia doesn't matter to the United States. What India needs to realize is that in economic terms, South Asia does not matter, including India. If you look at India's trade with the United States, it accounts for very little of what the United States needs, and all of it is replaceable. This is from some other source. This is very unlike China, where China has the United States by its throat. Why did all the tariffs come down dramatically on China very quickly? It was when they basically said they would withhold sending rare earth minerals and magnets to the United States. General Motors in Detroit was twiddling their thumbs for 1 month because they had no magnets, so they couldn't produce anything. Why? They basically, China said they will stop importing any agricultural products from the United States. That's MAGA base, the agricultural farmers who were dependent on China for their soybean and corn exports. China just said overnight, we're stopping this. These are only 2 examples, there are many others.
And these are not replaceable.
These are not replaceable and certainly not on the scale that the Chinese market provides, which is a much bigger scale than the Indian market, even though the population is roughly the same. The effective purchasing power in China is way higher. India's effective market is 10% of the population, 150 million people. Effective market is at least 2 or 3 times that. So the effective market size, effective purchasing power is way higher. India's market is neither deepening nor widening. We are stuck with 10%. How much more will that 10% buy? Okay, they can't. The 800 million people are on handouts. Okay, the balance are essentially living hand to mouth. So we do not have an effective market in the long run. We simply are benefiting, have benefited so far by virtue of absolute numbers, which is 150 million. But China is 3 times that size. Okay. Now, South Asia, the rest of South Asia as a market for US products is irrelevant. India too, as I said, is not that important. Trump can do business with, other countries, and there is nothing that India supplies to the US, whether it's footwear or whether it's garments or whether it's even jewelry, that they cannot import from somewhere else, unlike China, unlike Brazil, unlike some of even the Netherlands. So the thing is, unlike Japan, in terms of auto. So this is a big problem for India. And as I was saying to some friends, because I worked on trade issues for 25 years, I led a major book for the UN 20 years ago. I used to deal with India's top people on trade then. And I asked one of them the other day, please send me what you've written on agriculture recently. So he sent me an EPW article that he co-authored in 2018. And I said to him, you sent me pretty much the same thing 20 years ago. What has changed in terms of India's competitiveness? Nothing in agriculture. What has changed in terms of India's competitiveness in manufacturing? It's actually gone backwards. Our percentage of GDP that comes from manufacturing has gone down to 13% from 18%. The target was 25%. What whole product do we make? When I came back to India, I used to think it was pharmaceuticals, okay? And in the late 1990s, India used to make pharmaceutical ingredients. Now, I find that all of India's pharmaceutical ingredients are imported from China. So even pharmaceuticals, which India has claimed that it is the pharma capital of the world for generics, is not true. So even pharmaceuticals, on which Trump, by the way, will come up with very high tariffs soon. So the tariff announcements are not over. Pharmaceuticals, which India thinks are excluded, is just a matter of time. Okay, but India doesn't have a single product that matters. So this is a big thing. You talk about weakness in the defense area that you talked about. I'm talking about weakness in the economic area. India is not competitive. In every trade negotiation that I have encountered over 25 years, India essentially is on the defensive. It has never been able to liberalize or open up because you have to strategically open up. You open up when you can be competitive. You can't open up if you're not competitive. Okay, and we've got how many millions of farmers? How can you open up on agriculture and dairy? If the US is looking for India as a major market for soybean and corn, quite apart from the GM issue, quite apart from the genetically modified issue, which is a non-tariff barrier which is in contention, you can't open up. I mean, this is not just a development issue, it's a political issue. The government will fall. Okay, no government wants to fall. So you open up on agriculture and dairy products, the government will fall politically. So from a trade point of view and from a tariff point of view, India is between a rock and a soft place. I would say not even a hard place, because soft place means you can sink further.
How much of this is going to affect India's relations with its neighbors?
Well, yeah, I should say that all our neighbors obviously have got lower tariffs than India. India's tariffs are only equal to Brazil. And Brazil has got those tariffs for entirely different reasons, or for somewhat different reasons, which are political. Part of India's tariffs have a political dimension, but part of them are not political. But if you look at garments, Bangladesh is a major competitor, has been a major competitor. And you have to break it down then to see which garments you're actually competing with Vietnam, with Bangladesh. But both of them have lower tariffs than India. And the tariffs don't account for inefficiencies or, let's say, the cost of infrastructure. India's cost of infrastructure, that's part of the reason it has never been competitive, is that its cost of infrastructure is very high. There are a lot of inefficiencies. There's a lot of corruption. And Vietnam, which I know well for 36 years, I've been going there, I can tell you that they came from nowhere, according to many people, but I saw it over 36 years, how they have grown as an economy. Very disciplined, very much able to compete, much better educated. Okay, because primary education, primary health, all of these things matter. Okay, even in trade, if you have an educated workforce, it's a more disciplined workforce, it's a more educated workforce. So even in the services area where India had an advantage, early advantage, but that was back office stuff. Now you pick up the phone and call. I've lived in the Philippines, I can recognize a Philippine accent. Okay, I've lived in Malaysia, I can recognize a Malaysian accent. Okay, you're more likely to get a Filipino or a Filipina or a Malaysian speaking to you than an Indian. And the Indian services thing hasn't gone up. So we don't have the same competitive advantages in services. Right now the tariffs are only on goods. They're not on services. Trump has purposely excluded it because if he included it, the US has a huge trade surplus on services with the whole world. The other big issue for India, and it goes back to your questions about where will the money come from to buy defense equipment, etc. The only major country with which India has had a trade surplus has been the United States. It is a trade deficit country with ASEAN, with China, with every other country. Now, what Trump's objective is to get rid of that trade deficit, which effectively is done with 50% tariffs. There is no way India can compete on any of these things. So the trade surplus of 40 billion will be wiped out. So where will the money come from to buy stuff that Trump wants India to buy? It's a big, big issue. The Reserve Bank of India governor is going to have a lot of thinking to do, what he does with interest rates next and what he does
I want to pitch
in
in one thing. It's a common belief that the Indian defense market is very attractive to the United States.
Probably isn't.
No, it's so minor.
That's what I'm
They
saying.
have so much to do in again rearming themselves and rearming NATO, EU, that they don't, even if you want, and even if they're ready to supply, we don't buy in numbers, we buy a few stuff.
Yeah.
And they're not desperate to sell us. What we have to realize is that if you want some stuff, you have to get it out of them. They're not falling over themselves to sell us. So, whilst we will probably want to continue buying from the US, the amounts are not very significant.
No, but if there's any trade deal, part of it will be what Trump has a formula. 3 things in the formula. If you look at what's happened with Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, etc. One, he wants India, and people don't talk about this much, but one of the things he's upset about, he went public, God knows how many times, saying India has agreed to
F-35.
reduce its tariffs to 0. India can't reduce its tariffs to 0. But Trump said it 10 times, and India obviously can't agree. You can't agree to reduce your tariffs to 0 in agriculture or in dairy products or even in much of manufacturing, because the small and medium enterprises will get wiped out. Okay? So, but he wants that. Okay? The other is he wants you to buy large amounts of LNG or natural gas or whatever. The third is defense equipment. Okay? And he also wants, so he wants all of these things. You have to have the money to buy these things.
And the fourth is investment into the US.
Yeah, so
as
the
the
fourth,
EU did.
no, the fourth I was going to say, which he got Indonesia to agree, is to buy Boeing aircraft.
Even South Korea, yes.
It'll be a political
103
disaster for India after the Air India crash to start buying 50 Boeing aircraft, as Indonesia did.
But there's
Okay,
a lot of
as
Boeing
Vietnam did.
aircraft on order.
Huh?
But
Yeah,
those
yeah.
are major
No, I'm talking about new order. He's not, So the deal with the US on trade is going to be very difficult.
We will come to that. Thank you. Rami, your take. We moved away from tariffs, we moved away from defense. What is your take? You are a specialist in conflict management. Now, this is all conflicting. So, what is going to be your advice on resolving this conflict? Firstly, how do you see the conflict, and where do you see it getting resolved?
So I largely focus on the northeast of India and the northeastern borders. And I think while we've spoken about capability and we've spoken about capacity, I think there is a huge deficit in the scholarship that we have today. I don't think we have the expertise to see what is happening on our northeastern front in its entirety. I know that the northwestern front has always had a lot more interest, and we've always been observers of the northwestern front, far more closer than we've ever looked at the northeastern front. But now with the situation in Myanmar, now with the situation in Bangladesh, I think we have a problem that we are not being able to really see clearly, because we don't have all the information and we are not being able to connect the dots. To look at what is happening on the northeastern frontier, you have to look at now these two countries together. One of the first times the focus came onto this frontier recently was before the regime change. People started talking about it, and the regime change happened, and Bangladesh went the other way. That's also one of the times that we saw the US being spoken about on this frontier. We simultaneously saw in Myanmar in 2021 the fall of the government and the Taproot takeover. That also became problematic for us because we weren't really paying attention to Myanmar. The second time the US came into focus was recently on this frontier, was with the humanitarian corridor, the announcement of the humanitarian corridor, and which was a proposed corridor, and of course, U.S. policymakers can say we had nothing to do with it, but observers would, differ. They'd say they had very much something to do with it, because if you looked at the chain of meetings that happened just before the humanitarian corridor was announced, also the interest in the Rakhine state in Myanmar, with Arakan Army becoming the most formidable ethnic armed organization in Myanmar, it became pretty evident. There were even reports of USAF planes landing from Unadi with DIA operatives that were offloading cargo in Dhaka. So, of course, then they backtracked and there was a lot of hue and cry about it and that didn't go through. But what does that tell us? It tells us that there is a certain amount of interest that is coming in from Western powers, so as to say. Even when Sheikh Hasina, before the regime change, it was the US that put sanctions, not just on Sheikh Hasina's government, leaders from her government, but also the Rapid Action Battalion Force, which is the elite paramilitary force, which was, fairly surprising. In Myanmar, and again, you have to look at both of these countries now together. In Myanmar, you mentioned the critical earth minerals that, China, that was the first thing that they threw at them. One of the reasons that was the first thing that they threw at them is because 90% of the mining for critical earth and heavy rare earth elements is done in Myanmar, shipped to China, processed in China, and 80% of it lands in the US. Though US and European Union has a policy that they will not buy from conflict areas, they don't have a policy which says that they won't buy from second party. That is one of the reasons. Right after this, the Americans lifted sanctions over the Tatmadaw, leadership from the Tatmadaw. They've lifted sanctions. They also have publicly stated that they've had 2 or 3 parties from Myanmar come and offer them critical earth mining rights in Myanmar. So what I see, and this is where I see that, a lot of scholarship lacks, is what is a predictive analysis for the next 20 years? What is going to happen on these areas? I believe what is going to happen is, like Bertrand Lintner's books, which says the Great Game East. I think this is going to be the Great Game East. This is where a lot of contestations are going to happen, a lot of geopolitical, geostrategic contestations are going to happen. We must remember there's a huge footprint of China and Myanmar with the Chopra port right next to the Sittwe port, Coco Islands, which is leased by Myanmar to China, with the gas and oil pipeline that goes from the Bay of Bengal right up to Yunnan, that means it crosses. We've also seen some of the most high-powered meetings and the largest trade delegations to be received in Bangladesh, the Chinese trade delegation. There were over 100 businessmen that attended. So we're seeing all of this. Then there's the question of the Air Force base also in Bangladesh. So there's all this movement that is happening. And then there's the US also that seems to be interested. There definitely seem to be interest with the kind of statements that have been made. And that is all going to affect our porous borders on the northeastern frontier. Having said that, sir, also I do believe that, a lot of the repercussions of the political instability in both these countries, we will have to bear with. And I'm not quite sure if we are ready for it at this point, because when you talk about Pakistan also, Pakistan's come into Bangladesh in a very big way. We talk about the Rohingyas, but it's, I think, only a couple of months ago that the Four Brotherhood Alliance was formed as a proxy of the ISI, and they're being trained by the ISI in Chittagong Hill Tracts, which includes 4 of the main militia groups of the Rohingyas. We've also seen a role of Turkey, Turkey coming into Bangladesh with, we saw right now an NGO called Sultanate-e-Bangladesh, which took out, in Dhaka University, took out maps that envisioned a greater Bangladesh that included West Bengal and the Northeast. It's a Turkish-backed NGO. So I think there are going to be a lot of these interests that are going to come, and I think we have, as much as I don't like to say this, we have a serious deficit of scholarship on this area.
So how do you see the Chinese-US clash?
It's going to happen with the critical earth minerals, and I'll tell you why, sir. The minerals that they are mining, the heavy rare earth elements, is terbium and dysprosium. These are 2 of the elements that are used for your EV magnets. Therefore, with the Western, fascination with the 2050 goal on green transition, they need these minerals. I see it very similarly to the blood diamond politics that happened in Africa. I think that's the same thing that's going to happen here.
In Myanmar.
And if the Chinese, and you see what's happened is the Tatmadaw controls 50% of Myanmar, but the other 50% is controlled by ethnic armed organizations. Is it one unitary group? It isn't. It is completely fragmented. Sir, in the Chin areas, the ambassador knows these areas very well. The Chin state, we think it's just Chin National Front and Chin Brotherhood. Under Chin National Front, there are over 16 groups, and under Chin Brotherhood, there are another 15, and they're all clashing with each other. So what's going to happen is they're going to want to somehow generate money to keep the resistance alive. What are they going to do? And because I've done field work there, sir, and I've recently met all the ethnic armed organizations, I can tell you that they've already marked over 1,000 spots for critical earth mining. And they're willing to lease that out to whoever it will take. Now, the problem is, Kachin Independence Army, which is closer to China, already is sending most of the heavy rare earth. They sell it in soil, so trucks go. So they are selling it to China anyway. Now they're saying we want to sell it to India, but we have no processing. How do we take it? Also, China doesn't have to worry about environmentalists and so on and so forth, because once you mine, 20 years that soil cannot be used. We'd worry about it. Also, we'd be taking it from ethnic armed organizations. So who's going to come in? Countries that are able to take on these fragments are going to come in. And, the question now lies is that it's in our backyard.
Will US be willing to take it from ethnic armed organizations as per you?
Sir, I'm not sure, how
Evacuation would be a problem.
Yeah, where will they process it? There are a lot of observers that have said that India and the US will come together on this, processing.
And then there'll be in direct conflict with the Chinese interests.
Correct.
They would rather have something in between interface, and not this will be a direct.
Correct.
Yeah, that's it, sir.
Ambassador Mukhopadhaya, what is your take on all this?
All the discussion so far.
And my other question is very layman question again. How much should India engage or be concerned with what's happening in Myanmar?
So, look, I think we've had a very rich discussion. Ajay, I think in a way you're a bit lucky.
No, so I'm briefing.
It was a very sobering.
I'm leaving him to be the last so that he can gather more of the
sobering,
momentum of the
gloomy
discussion.
discussion. And I wish I could dispel some of the gloom and the pessimism that it generally generates. But I'm afraid I'm just going to have to add to it. And what I thought I would do is not go a little too much into granular part where, Rami, with due respect, I have some difference of opinion and interpretation as well, but I don't want the discussion to go into a bilateral channel. So if we look at all that, let's say, all the Admiral Chopra, Kamal from the trade side, and all of you from the military side have said, and what you have said from the neighboring side, I think there are 2 or 3 big picture things that we should keep in mind, which are basically the backdrop and the trend. One is arguable, though it may be. I think what we are seeing is really the question of the rise of China and the relative decline of the United States. Now, the United States is far ahead. It might take some time for it to really reach that position, but the signs are there. And one of the very signs of that is simply Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," is an admission that they are sliding and that they need to make up for lost time, right? So, okay, we can argue about that, but even within that relative power that they have at this moment of time, the Chinese have shown that they are able to exercise power far more capably than the Americans. The Americans may have greater power, but if their use of it is unwieldy, ineffective, and we've seen what they have done with their wars practically worldwide. So this is one. The second big macro development that we have to face, and all this sort of fits in some respects, is that in South Asia itself, we have totally lost ground. There was a period when everyone practically, even the United States, certainly China, accepted that South Asia was our backyard. And in fact, would advise many of the smaller countries that occasionally wanted to challenge us or wanted to defy us, that, you settle your business with India. Today, China has become in many sense the arbiter of virtually anything that happens in South Asia. And every country in our neighborhood which has problems with India, and as the larger country, the larger economy, the larger power, every country will have problems with India, is getting very adept at leveraging this. Now, once in a while, we may be able to pull back from the brink, like in Sri Lanka or Maldives, where things have changed hands from time to time. But the overall picture is that we are losing. To add to that, I think I think Rami is very right when she says that there is a dearth and lack of scholarship. But I'd also see that, I'd also say that in many ways we are chasing the wrong bird. Because if we take, for example, the issue of the Bay of Bengal, you also started off with that. We have invested a lot of rhetoric, we have invested a lot of thinking, you can say, on the Quad, on the South China Sea, on the Indo-Pacific. But again, something that I've been talking a lot about is the single biggest channel in the maritime dimension that we are having is the CMEC and the deep sea natural harbor that the Chinese are developing in Chofu. Arguably, the Chofu harbor is the best natural harbor in the entire Bay of Bengal. And we spend a lot of time talking about conspiracies involving the Americans through humanitarian aid through the Arakan army, which is illogical. And we could go into a separate discussion on that. Because it just doesn't make sense for Arakan army to cooperate with the Americans against the Chinese, with the Chinese exercise. So if we just see the logical tray, this doesn't work. I'm not denying that Americans have done something, but in the end, it will not work simply because it doesn't make logical sense. But we are ending up demonizing the Americans when the Chinese are literally there and we are not the Chinese. And that is the big strait, and that is in the Bay of Bengal. We are not even talking about the submarine base that the Chinese reportedly have access to in Bangladesh. And now with the new dispensation, this happened with the old dispensation. Now with the new dispensation, what that would be. So, so there is this picture overall in which we are functioning. And then on the economic front, look, we acquired some respect at the turn of the millennium, Y2K, when people saw India as an emerging economy, maybe even a rising power. I happened to accompany Defense Minister George Fernandez on his kind of, ice-breaking trip to China during the height of SARS in 2004. Karan Thapar had cornered George Fernandez into saying China is the enemy number one. And the Chinese began to feel, okay, grudging respect for us, they need to get Fernandez back to their side a little. And roughly we had a period from about 2010 to 2012. And this was the period when we had the agreements on the guiding principles, 2005, another agreement in 2008, when they even talked about Asia being big enough for China and India together. Now, sometime starting around the second decade, when the Chinese began to feel that we are drifting towards the American camp for whatever reason, they started questioning us more and more. And in fact, they predicated our future relationship on the distance that we can make from the United States. And as Admiral Chopra says, in this situation that we have today, which is the country that can help us? And, because China is going to be your strategic, not just rival, but possibly a little more than that in the coming future. And in that context, our relationship with the United States is really degenerating. And it's actually, even though really speaking, it's in many ways President Trump's capriciousness, his, erratic and kind of unpredictable behavior that has brought this about. The fact is that that we have not been able to handle it. We thought we were playing this multi-alignment, multi-polarity game.
Okay.
In fact, we have landed up in the middle of. We didn't recognize that the world was really tricentric. That Russia was a pole in this tricentric world, and we are in real risk and danger of landing in between all these three. And that grudging respect that we had in the second decade or first decade of the
Early first
millennium, built largely on our IT successes. Now there's a new revolution, the AI revolution. And the AI revolution China is way ahead and we are nowhere there. So if you look at it, your macro perspective and your macro prospects, actually we don't have the elements. Kamal also made the point that we have really nothing that the world desperately needs. So we have a situation where we need the Americans, and because the Americans also have an objective rival in China, what the Americans need to hear is that they need us, that at this point of time, this kind of capricious policy is going to harm them as well. I'm not saying we should be an ally in the conventional sense, but we need to have a much harder grip on our what we call national interests, which I call real interests, and not be deluded by by delusions really, because I think that's what is happening. Even now we are trying to project things as great successes, whereas in fact if we look at our neighborhood and the world, frankly at this moment we have never been more friendless than this.
That's true.
So I think this is the realization. And as far as Myanmar is concerned, again Myanmar, we have, there was a moment when we could have made the right moves. We should, if you see our history and if you see our post-independence history, we basically, until about the late 80s, we stood for people power more than brute force. And increasingly now we are thinking that brute force is what is going to get us the dividends, and we are backing brute force, and in fact sometimes very dislikable regimes everywhere, even in our neighborhood, whether it's the Taliban or it's the Junta. And at the right time, we should have been making the right moves and the right.
One very quick point for Afghanistan.
Yes.
Any take on what's happening?
No, right now Afghanistan is in a state of freeze. But what is interesting is that China has prepared itself with these, with what they call their China, Pakistan, Afghanistan. They're trying to.
Yeah, that's
So what the Chinese are trying to do there, and I think again that is very, very significant, is that the Chinese have over the last few years, and in a way I would even explain what is happening in Ladakh related to that, is, they invested a lot in this and that, CMEC, CEPC, but ultimately they see their vulnerability as the Straits of Malacca. And they are positioning themselves to now puncture the Pamir and the Hindu Kush, and basically reach out through a continental route to the Gulf and to West Asia, where a lot of their energy interests lie, particularly in the Persian Gulf and in Iran. So even Gwadar or even Karachi is actually not
Which is
secure
this
enough.
corridor which is opened up in Azerbaijan, Armenia?
That is the IMEC thing.
No,
That
no,
is,
not us. Just yesterday, because
That's
of
the
its-
Trump corridor, the
because
Trump
of
peace
this
corridor.
Peace corridor. Apparently, there is some access, geographical access, which has been gained due to the peace efforts of Trump in
No,
Azerbaijan.
I mean, if you want to talk about Armenia, Azerbaijan, I used to be the head of the UN in Turkey, so I know
only for
that
this,
rather well.
Only what is, if you could just tell me what has happened
can
post
I,
this.
Please.
Well-
let's wrap this up so that. So essentially, what we are is that. But now in Myanmar, what is happening is the Myanmar regime has read that the geopolitics has changed totally. Trump has no idea where Myanmar is. Somebody briefed him, as you said, about rare earths. He doesn't even know that the rare earths are actually in Kachin areas. Once he discovers that they're in Kachin areas, actually the junta will not be of much use for him. He will have to start dealing with the Kachins. But they have read the picture and they are now seeing Trump has withdrawn. He's withdrawn US aid, virtually taken his hands off Myanmar, whatever little there was. But on the other hand, you're seeing that the Russians are coming out ascendant in Ukraine. The Chinese are coming out defying the Americans. And the Chinese last year decided to take sides openly. While playing both sides, they decided to take sides openly with the junta. And they have put almost unbearable pressure on the TNLA, on the MNDA, even the KIA, to relax their offensive, or at least to stop their offensive. In fact, very recently, they even pressed the United Army on that. So, the Myanmar army also sees an opportunity in this to push ahead their elections, to raise their offensive against the ethnic armed groups. And in the last 2 weeks, or last month, they have made significant gains, capturing towns that the opposition had captured and held for practically close to a year. So, the situation is that China too is going to be more and more Myanmar too is going to come more and more under China's influence, if not control. And we just don't seem to be talking about this. In fact, they will be literally at your boundary in the northeast.
So may I add on the because I met Arapans on the the port building, the gas and oil pipeline. They have what the junta has taken out what is called the JSVC, Joint Security Venture Company,
Correct.
where you can bring in your own security to protect your
company.
assets. They have 500 Chinese security guards, or you could call them whatever, but they are there. So you have boots on the ground.
Rami, we have ignored this for too long because they have oil pipeline, gas terminal, they have a special economic zone, and now they have a deep sea hub.
So, but what we are sort of not being able to, and maybe it will happen, and I don't want to be too negative about this, is that the Kaladam multimodal project, the remaining part of it, which is up in Zoranpuri, there was a recent statement by Minister Sonowal who said that it would be ready by next year. But the Arakan themselves are very keen that it is built because this is their only access to get basic necessities.
Can you just explain to me?
I just went there. I went in May to Kaladam.
We've traditionally, like for me we look at South Asia, we see Afghanistan, we see Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, South Asia, expanded with Afghanistan as included. Why is Myanmar suddenly becoming more important to us?
Actually, it was always important. We forgot it for 50 years. From 1960s
to overlooked.
2010, we forgot it. We only rediscovered it once the junta liberalized under the USDP.
Once we face terrorism based on in those regions.
So, Ambassador Bisaria, thank you for joining in.
Sorry, 70 minutes on the road.
I'm glad that you are not drenched sufficiently. Air Marshal Hora was actually in a swimsuit coming from Gautam. So, our focus today has been essentially South Asia, and we are looking at the shifting sands over the last 2 months or so, when a lot of dramatic changes have happened. And the idea here is to discuss. First, we've seen a naval perspective, an air force, an army, and then we've seen a tariff perspective from Kamal, and then Rami put in an analysis of Northeast and Myanmar, and then Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya talked about again Myanmar and the East. How do you see relations taking us backward, forward, changing scenario, America's interests, Chinese interests, Pakistan there, Bangladesh there? How do you see where we are today in South Asia?
Yeah, thanks. So, let me just talk of the big picture because we've had a very interesting granular discussion on Myanmar as a case study. So if you look at the big picture, I think for India and its neighborhood, it's a story of India being some kind of island of stability in a sea of ferment. If we see, for instance, the neighborhood, we start with two hostile adversaries and neighbors in Pakistan and China, one led by a rogue army, the other by, in many ways, a rogue communist party. We also see two failing states, and as Rami said, in February we see a coup in Myanmar, in August we see a coup of 2021 in Afghanistan, and two virtually failing states to our east and west, where we struggle to make sense of it and to have a sufficient degree of influence. We also see then other states which are playing the China card in different degrees, balancing, leveraging, hedging, whatever you'd like to call it, and then going through their own stories of ferment. And one of the points I would make is that we can't blame ourselves for a lot of dynamics which are internal to those countries, which we neither have the will nor the capacity to influence. So, if there are coups in Afghanistan or in Myanmar, we had nothing to do with it. We couldn't influence it. There was a near coup in between these in Pakistan when in May 23 the PTI of Imran Khan tried to almost dislodge the army. That didn't work. And what we see with the other states is we saw Sri Lanka go through its own revolution in 2022, and it came back on the rails. Bangladesh went through its coup last year and didn't come back on the rails. So there is an electoral process that will come. And we know what happened in Maldives, in both Bhutan and Nepal. They went through their revolutions in the 2010s earlier because they kind of dislodged the monarchies and became democracies. So I think in that context, we are also unmistakably the big brother, and they also have the China factor, which is real and present in the neighborhood. What we have done in various shapes and forms is followed the neighborhood first policy. So not just in its present avatar, but perhaps from the 90s, from the Gujarat doctrine onwards. And that is essentially based on an understanding of asymmetric benefits. And I would summarize it as saying that India's social contract or political contract with the neighbors was, I will give you disproportionate help in your prosperity if you give me support in my security. That is my red line. So help me in my security and I will help you in your prosperity. And therefore, we give $4 billion to Sri Lanka when it faces its 22 crisis. We give $8 billion of LOCs to Bangladesh when it faces its crisis. And we try to help the other neighbors as well. Now, I would accept the proposition that for both the difficult neighbors of Afghanistan and Myanmar, and to an extent Bangladesh, we don't have sufficient scholarship, we don't have sufficient depth in our policy making and policy thinking environment, therefore, of being able to deal with these problems. We also don't have sufficient covert capacities, which we require to deal with issues like the Arakan army and so on. And at least I think we don't have enough capacities to be able to deal with that kind of ferment. So I would say that we shouldn't be blaming ourselves too much, but we need to be able to put in more resources. So for instance, Maldives, we saw start with India out and then back to Modi in just a couple of months ago. So they would go through a process. We expected Sri Lanka with Desai to go completely into the Chinese embrace. That didn't happen. We were the first movers there. So I think we would have to keep moving, spending disproportionately and getting the benefits. Now, countering China is important. Watching Pakistan's play is important. Because that I think is significant, because in Bangladesh, Pakistan will fish in those troubled waters, try to get the ISI in, try to use that to get ferment into the northeast. That will be a given. So we will have to counter that in multiple ways, even if the elections next year produce a more India-friendly regime. And I would have advocated in Bangladesh that our External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, should have visited Bangladesh, just like he did Sri Lanka, despite the fact that there was some degree of hostility early in the game. Because I think we need to turn them around, we need to accept that they will be playing that card. We cannot play the card of having the big powers play against each other. We tried to get the Russians into Bangladesh, It helped us. We did a trilateral deal in the nuclear power Rupur project. But the US will play its own game. It won't necessarily accept a Monroe Doctrine light to say, India, this is your hegemony in South Asia. A word on the US. You know, I think the way to look at Donald Trump's revolution in the United States is that it is a kind of statement of the United States as a hemispheric power. That he does see the world as spheres of influence, and the Western Hemisphere, Europe, Canada, and the region is where he wants to be the dominant hegemon, and elsewhere he is what they think is the external balancer. So he would come into Europe and stop the war. He would come into West Asia and stop the war as the external balancer. But the MAGA guys don't want boots on the ground. They don't want forever wars. We hope that he becomes a resident power in the Indo-Pacific because of the China challenge, and which is going to be the dominant challenge for the United States and for us. And I would agree with the thought that let's not go by the month of August. It's been a short month where the relationship with the US has tumbled. I see it as turbulence. I see if we play the long game, by the end of the year, you'll probably have the two wars in the world ending. You'll have, therefore, the tariffs being reversed, and you'll probably have a situation where you have a trade deal, and you probably have a situation where Donald Trump comes in. That'll be my base case scenario in November to sign the deal.
He would be. He told me.
So you know, our essential. So our essential, I think, critical strategic partners will remain the United States and Russia, and we'll tell both of them, look, guys, we have the core national interest in the other, so don't screw around.
You know, I just want to.
But China will remain the strategic rival in the next 30 years. And what we are seeing right now this month is a tactical adjustment, not a strategic reset.
I was thinking of your business diplomacy akin to a chess game.
And four-dimensional chess.
A chess game, but a chess game where each side is playing its pieces.
Yeah.
We have a very quick tendency in India, particularly in the media. Every time there's a check, we conclude it's mate.
Yeah.
It's not mate yet, it's a challenge. And each check has its different dimensions and proportions. Some of it is very easy to digest and get away with. Some of those checks become a bit of a bigger challenge. So the game is going on.
Absolutely.
And we tend to think that, as you said Ajay, a little while ago, that a lot of this, what is happening to us, is a result of other people's compulsions, other people's, shall we say, domestic compulsions. So now, one thing which strikes me again as a non-specialist, I've been calling myself that repeatedly because I could be way off the mark, that the Russian oil was not such an issue till 1 month ago. Buying Russian oil was not a problem till a month ago. Why has it become suddenly a big issue? Because Trump was of the opinion by now he would have solved the Russian-Ukraine war. It hasn't come to pass. So this is pressure on India and Russia, over India, to tell Russia to bend in Ukraine and agree. So he's using us to Russia.
Absolutely. And you know, to bolster your point, with the Biden administration requested us,
Yes.
please buy Russian oil, please buy it in that band, stabilize prices.
The price cap.
The price
Is there
cap.
any truth in
No.
that by way of
No, I think you're missing some
documentation?
really
Sorry.
important
No,
points.
one
Sorry?
second.
I
This
think
is
you're missing some really important points.
Which is
in
what?
the jigsaw puzzle, why
Which
this
is that
sudden turnaround and
It's not-
the Americans?
Firstly, it's not sudden. The problem is a lot of Indians seem to only want to read what they want to read. Okay? Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from Carolina, long ago tabled in the US Congress his
500%.
his bill, which had 500% tariffs, and he's got close to 100 congressmen. This is quite independent of Trump.
Tariffs against.
You know, just like you can't
Against
Everybody
Russian,
anyone.
No,
Yeah. No, hang on.
but only this year.
No. My own view is, of course, different, which is that I think it's been a problem from day one for moral and ethical reasons. It is blood money, basically to support a war that has fueled a war through a country, through what the UN regards as a war criminal.
No, but tell me.
No, hang on.
And that, by that yardstick, you should also
If we get that oil
target
from
Israel.
Russia,
Netanyahu
Of course I do.
also
Process
be
it.
targeted.
Of course I
then we
do.
give it to Europe.
The problem for
Is
India,
Europe a part of?
Yeah, so you know, it's
it
a
has no
realist
friends
uh,
except two war criminals.
It's
Right
a
now.
realist choice. If we make that argument that Russian oil supports a war criminal, so does Russian defense equipment.
Sure, it
We're
does.
buying BrahMos missiles.
It does.
And we got S-400 air defense
Yes, it
systems.
does.
And the reason we are sitting in Delhi and having this conversation is that no Pakistani missile or Pakistan-Chinese missile penetrated that
That's
air
okay,
defense
but the
system.
point is
No,
it's
no, no.
still-
So I'm just
it's
making
still
the limited point
fueling the
that
war.
we, in a realist assessment, are getting our defense and energy needs from the Russians as much as with the Israelis. You might argue that there's another war criminal.
I do
there,
agree.
carrying
No, I
out
don't
genocide.
argue. He is a UN
and-
designated
and-
war criminal.
And from the United States, which also has its hands very bloody in a number of things.
Correct.
So what choices do we have if I want to protect my country from an attack from a Pakistan-Chinese?
You know, there is a fundamental problem.
America has hosted
That-
what you call the blood.
America-
No. There is a fundamental
Before we
problem
lose track
with
of
Indian
it.
foreign policy now,
Yes.
which has essentially abandoned any
Yes,
sense.
I want to pick up a point that Ajay made. You know, this belief that we don't really have the capacity, the diplomatic capacity to sometimes intervene in our neighborhood. This hasn't stopped us in the past. But let's take Myanmar. If there is one country, this movement in Myanmar, the anti-junta movement, is basically powered by desire for democracy and a desire for federalism.
You're talking covert or overt?
No, I'm coming to that. In principle,
Yeah.
what are the two fundamental things? Democracy and federalism. Which country in the neighborhood and perhaps which country in the world has greater credentials to be able to address
Address or
those concerns?
support and
we
nurture.
don't lack diplomatic capacity. We may lack academic capacity, but going back to Shyam Saran, we have enough people who are, capable of playing that kind of role. Again, on the neighborhood. Yes, I agree with you that to a great extent some things happen outside our capabilities. And your point about the basic contract that we made, security versus prosperity. But, as I said in the last time I was here, the basic template that we've used in our neighborhood, to come back to the neighborhood, is that we're either the good big brother or the tough big brother. And one way or the other, it is a big brother kind of complex that we exercise in our neighborhood. I think we need to be just much more respectful, number one. But the single biggest thing that we can do for the neighborhood to create that stake in co-prosperity is to open our agricultural market. We don't need to open our agricultural markets to the Chinese. We don't need to open it to the West. Our CEP, the positions we have taken are fine. But we have nothing to lose by opening our agricultural markets to our even poorer neighbors around us. And that's the single thing through the stomachs of the farmers that would bind
I
us.
may add tourism.
But right now,
I may add tourism,
I
and
get it.
a colleague of ours from the IAS side, Sanat Kaur, also from college. Sanat has a very good paper where he's saying that your Udan scheme can be made available to South Asian neighbors as a significant step to promote Indian tourism in our neighborhood. And I think that's something which we can do very, very easily. The other is that you have this LTA. Now, So these are small little shops.
Navin,
Leave travel alone.
LTC.
LTC. Oh.
If you give
Small
the
little
Afghans
steps.
visas,
Uh,
we've just banned their visas as a totalist policy.
Yeah.
And
We
we're
could
doing
have
the
had
same in
so much
Bangladesh.
No,
influence.
but my very serious question to all of you, because coming back to the neighborhood, talking about all the shifting sands in the neighborhood, my question is, can India be written off by our neighbors? Are we being so naive, if I may say so, in thinking that we actually don't count in their scheme of things? Number two, if you see the pattern of, say, Sri Lanka, you see the pattern of Maldives particularly, there is the run-up to the elections in their countries where India beating becomes fashionable. They come to power, they're there for 6 months, 8 months, they see the reality of India, they can't do without India. So you see the turnaround in Maldives, but huge turnaround where Prime Minister Modi is chief guest at the National Day. Sri Lanka, that guy, the present premier, was all anti-Indian, his entire program was anti-Indian. It softened up, total turnaround. I don't know how long Pakistan can cozy up to China.
Pakistan
I think
is
it's the deep state
sui
that
generis, so it is
Can I
long term.
just take two phrases which have been said by both of you as sort of sum to this? You made a very interesting statement on this region. China has become the arbiter in every country in South Asia, other than India. Whether it's Bhutan, Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka. India beating before elections is like America beating California, and then we go back to them because they're critical. Every time there's a discussion, everybody finally realizes that where else to go. And therefore, whatever our personal issues about the Americans, the government acts in a particular way through successive governments for many times. You have to, but we have this great, and so I brought in what you said about the neighborhood in very much a way what we are facing today. Because of these tariffs, we are demonizing America at the moment, which always happens in a jingoistic sort of way. But we have to be careful, I'm sure everybody would agree, that we don't let this rise to a situation where everything gets damaged for a long period of time. Then we will be shooting ourselves in the own foot. And if we really think that the Russians can provide, to use that earlier discussion, the kind of defense needs which are coming up in 21st century warfare, China is not going to give it to us. Russians can't. And if we don't have some access to private technology, private companies in the US, then our defense industry base, I keep coming back to it. Your power stems from your ability to make state-of-the-art weaponry. If you don't have that, you are, in your words, forever leveraging, hedging, and balancing. What you accuse these three countries, our neighborhood, doing with us, that they hedge and balance and leverage China and India, we are constantly leveraging. US, China, Russia. Why are we leveraging? Because we don't have power. Why are they leveraging? They don't have power. So the bottom line is that even now, if we focus on all these geopolitical sort of, interesting games, but what is not a game is the defense industry base. And if you don't get it from interaction with companies from the West, where are you going to get it from?
So Anil, my question is this. Why is it that in defense industries and maybe even defense research, we have not succeeded in the way that we did with nuclear and we did with space? What was wrong on the defense side that we could not do this?
You want my answer
Yes, well,
offline or online?
He's told us this answer the last conversation.
No,
It can be offline.
In fact, the reason, one of the things I'm writing at the moment is the absolute, what have I titled, the imperative to grow private sector integrators or prime contractors in India. What's happening in India is that the prime contractors are all in the public sector. And our private sector is limited to supply chains for the public sector. And the public sector just doesn't have the ecosystem to generate the kind of innovation required for integrating large platforms, etc. And I could go on forever.
Actually,
So, and then the private sector doesn't get the orders.
Integration point taken, but why is it that we were successful in nuclear and in
Because
space?
we are very much specialized and focused. Now the defense sector is everything from ordnance to ships to aircraft
We
to...
were doing well in missile.
both cases, nuclear and space, directly been run by the PMP office.
Yeah, so there's a process issue as well. Right.
But
So I don't
And
want to say
it's
it
much
now,
smaller than the defense.
but part of the problem and not part of the problem, I don't mind everyone who's saying it, big problem is MOD.
Yeah.
You have to restructure MOD. I'm not anything against the people in MOD. But if you carry on MOD like the last 75 years, nothing is going to change.
In MOD, you speak to people, unfortunately. The bureaucrat,
I spent 3 years there.
very good, sir. Sorry that what I said. For you, the bureaucratic process matters more than
No,
the end
actually,
product.
it's not. It's a serious problem. In MEA, you have a own cadre, and it's a viable cadre. It can lead to promotion, etc. Now, you can't create a cadre of bureaucrats only for the MOD. It will be too small and too restricted. So they don't want to come into MOD because MOD is restrictive. So there's a reluctance to come to MOD, and then the people who come there are mostly people who have not even dealt with an iota of defense
You
issues.
recall?
I would agree that, to be a major power,
You can't do this.
which the ambition of which we have to be a leading and major power by 2030, not dependent, a pole in the multipolar world, we will have to be growing at that 9% to reach that 30
And we have
trillion,
to restructure.
and we'll have to put that 5% of GDP into defense because we won't be a major power unless we
Sir, we are not even putting money into research. Forget about
Exactly.
manufacturing.
All of that.
Until you put money into research, we put less money into research than Amazon and the big companies.
Where is the real research being done? Let's talk about it. It's either being done in authoritarian regimes which have full control of everything they do, Russia, China, to the degree in the sense they can tell anybody to do whatever they want. In the other side of the world, it's not being done by government, it's not being done by, it is government contracts to private industry, allows private industry to take the young brains, from the universities. There's a very interesting paper that real blue sky research comes from the age group of 19 to 27, before the guys get married, before they start having 2 kids, before they get into the family ecosystem. And those are the guys at the front end of looking at much technology, not just military technology, but biotech and everything else.
I want to go back to the economic side for
Yeah,
one minute.
no, so you'll have your chance just now.
Okay.
I'm just suggesting that as we conclude, this will take another good 10, 15 minutes, 2 hours, maybe, I don't know. One takeaway from this evening session, from each one of us, may I recommend it should be solution-based, constructive-based. What do you think is the solution, the way forward, knowing all the problems that we have? On a positive note, constructive note. So, each one of us, what is your solution going forward? Yes, we have all our problems, capacity, scholarship, whatever else. We are missing funds. We are too late. Manufacturing nahi ho raha.
Yes.
Sab kuch pata hai, but we are still on that chessboard, and we still have to make our moves. We are not getting mated. We will be fighting the game. So, Ajay, you want to start with one positive, constructive thought going forward? This is my way forward for us to get off and make.
So I would say additional resources in the neighborhood. We should put our money where our mouths are and spend much more than we're doing asymmetrically to get greater influence in the neighborhood and control things so that we don't face a security issue.
And to do that, what about the other power rivalries that we are having?
Yes, so I think that is the way of dealing with it. So, the larger mission that we seem to be agreeing on is to grow at 7 to 10% and to become that $30 trillion economy, which is spending enough on researching and on defense to be able to have our own defense ecosystem
And also-
to reduce dependence on all major powers, none of whom we should trust for all critical
None of them we should trust. Kamal?
Yeah, 2 things. One is on the economy. I think the the critical issue is India has to become more competitive in terms of
How?
yeah. So it has to become more competitive by essentially investing, firstly, in people much more, so that we have a workforce which is able to compete with a lot of our neighbors. We don't have such a workforce. We have very, very large numbers of underemployed people, what I call the 3 U's and the 2 I's: unemployed, underemployed, unemployable, those who essentially are ill-suited in terms of their employment, PhDs applying for jobs of peers. We are not creating the kinds of, the rest is informal unpaid work, which is the only sector that's actually grown since particularly the demonetization period. So we have to deal with this challenge. This is the biggest economic challenge that India faces. Any kind of economic growth will have to take into account this unemployment. And what people are not focusing on in terms of the tariff is it's going to increase unemployment, because most of the industries impacted are heavily labor intensive. Whether you look at footwear, whether you look at garments, etc., you're talking about lakhs of people in danger of now becoming unemployed into a workforce which is already unemployed. So focusing on becoming the 3rd largest economy in the world is missing the picture. Unless India deals with this and becomes more competitive, it is not going to be able to compete. Forget about China. I'm talking about even ASEAN, Southeast Asia. And I just want to go back to a story of 2000, when the World Trade Organization ministerial meeting broke down in Seattle in late 1999. I was asked to lead a major study and a book on the global trading system. China had not even joined the WTO then, okay? Which was the country that led the global south then? It was India, okay? I worked with China, I worked with India, I worked with Brazil, I worked with all these countries. They all used my book. But the interesting thing was, it's India that taught China all about trade and all about the WTO. You look at that was 2000, I was there, so I saw it. 25 years later, there is a huge gap. And it's a huge gap of competitiveness. It's not just about knowing the trade rules.
What do you mean by competitiveness? Can you?
Well, I mean that, okay, let me take Vietnam and India in terms of even garments, okay? Vietnam now has tariffs of 20%, has tariffs of 50%. But I've argued that even if India had tariffs of 10% and Vietnam had tariffs of 20%, Vietnam would be more competitive. Simply because there are a whole bunch of other things to do with what I was talking about earlier, the cost of infrastructure, all the other costs, which make India not competitive. Okay, India has never focused effectively on exports. The irony is that one of the only reasons why the tariffs will not have such a huge impact on the economic growth rate of India is that because India's exports as a sector represent a minuscule part of its economy. Okay, but that's the only reason saving India from a huge impact on its
There's a McKinsey
GDP.
report I read,
But-
0.35%.
Okay, but that was before the 50% tariffs which go into effect tomorrow. That already doubles the GDP impact. So we are talking about growing at 9%, which is what we have to grow at, but we are going to grow at less than 6% with 50% tariffs. And we have all this unemployment and all of this.
Okay, very quick one. I was actually he
Constructive.
stole my point. All right, that
take
is
it back from
about education.
You take it back
from
from
the grassroots, right? Especially of the girl child. Okay, that will make a big difference. But one more thing, wherever you see a failure, it always leads up to the judiciary. The strengthening of the judiciary will make a huge amount of difference. when other people come to invest in us, within our own, when trade thing, business comes up, problems come up, they should not get bogged down.
Would you think that seeking mediation could become a part of the judiciary process?
It has to. It's only that we don't have trained mediators. We just don't have the numbers today. And as a concept, mediation in the country is not taken off because of the legal guys. The
Yes.
lawyers see it as a threat to their bread and butter.
Vested interest, keeping you.
That we can keep another.
Ambassador Mukhopadhaya, what is your constructive way ahead to
So
make things work?
domestically, I would say broad-basing growth. If the 500 million who are practically contributing nothing to the country's growth can contribute just 2%, the amount of GDP that you will unleash will more than compensate that 1% that is growing at such proportions that it's taking the entire population at 6%. Number one.
How would you do that?
Well, by all kinds of investments, basically at the grassroots, particularly agriculture, particularly small farms, and everything that shoots out of that. So self-help groups, cooperatives, farmers, producers, organizations, agri-industries, because that comes out of that, education of the girl child, I mean definitely, not only the girl child, education in general, health, I would say, would be another great area. But this is one part. Regionally, I would say again that you cannot be a major power without carrying your region.
They don't carry you?
Your
Region, your immediate.
And therefore, the magic wand there is opening up your agri market, because today 5% intra-South Asian trade. You know, it's effectively you are yourself cutting your legs, your base for your your larger performance. And finally, at the international level, I'll say, really, right now we may have this problem with the Americans, and we have to rebound to the Chinese and the Russians and so on. But in the end, we should keep in mind that the growing strategic rival is China.
So I've got these 2-3 points to make. Our first biggest issue, which I've been saying all throughout, is we need to resolve our borders. Now, whichever manner you do it, your two main neighbors, your borders are contested. So how do you do it? And the only way you can do it is dialogue and compromise. We've not been able to, willing to compromise, because we've sold a story, which is that we, had the area right till X point. I mean, that's past. So, you have to do that. Secondly, I feel, which nobody will agree with me, and that is you need to be not part of an alliance, but have somebody backing you and who will support you throughout. And the third thing I'll say, which has been touched upon by Sir, everybody talks of personalities, talks of ideologies, and you say that, you do the A, B, C, but actually there's a system that needs to be fixed. And one of the systems is our, unfortunately, the bureaucracy. That system needs to be fixed, and we have the institutions, but are they independent? They had the people who were independent, but are they now being allowed to be independent? That's the issue.
Rani?
I'll also look at it from the point of view that you've looked at it. So I think security is very important to us, especially like I study the northeastern borders, so I'll speak about Myanmar and Bangladesh. I think apart from all the gloom and gloom that we've spoken about, I think Myanmar, we haven't done too bad. The reason being that today, as it stands, USDP is going to come into power as a military-backed party. And our channels of communication have always been open with them. We also have channels of communication open with some of the EOs that matter to us. So I think in that sense, we've recognized the fact that this is not like the previous revolution, which had one leader that unified the resistance like Aung San Suu Kyi. This resistance does not have a leadership. It's completely fragmented. So we've been able to negotiate with everybody. Where we lack, sir, is the fact that, like the Chinese, they have influence on the EOs and the Tatmadaw. Reason being, they have a special envoy. They have a person who can go negotiate, promise them what they need, come to a conclusion there and then, and get whatever they need immediately. Whereas what happens with us is any of our negotiation takes so long, promises are not kept, and by the time it comes back to Delhi, it becomes problematic. when we look at Bangladesh also, I think it's going to take its natural course. Bangladesh celebrated when Yunus came. I think, he's going to go as a very unpopular leader at some point. And when BNP comes, I think they also going to recalibrate their relationship with us. I think we have to come to the acceptance that India as a big power is always going to have smaller countries use India as to rouse some amount of nationalist sentiments within their own countries during election time. And we shouldn't get too carried away with that. But I really do think that giving more power to people of influence in these countries would make a difference from our end.
Admiral sir?
Last word.
Navin, since you asked for one,
No, it can be three.
uh,
So long as they're constructive and forward
when I
looking.
look at it, and I think most of you would agree, all military, diplomatic, technological power of any country stems from its economy. India has an entrepreneurial genius which we have stifled ourselves for many decades, but fully till 91 and even today. If you don't, I sometimes say that the pillars of security, the captains of industry are the pillars of security. If you don't have economic creation of wealth, whenever somebody does a business, we all know that. It's not just making his personal wealth. It is providing revenue, providing employment, and more importantly, providing goods and services. If you don't have goods and services, the paper money is of no use. It took 1 billion marks to buy a loaf of bread in the Weimar Republic. But what I'm trying to say is that we have still not unleashed our economy. The government is talking about second reforms. I hope that comes about. But this is not so exciting as the military or the diplomacy games or technology. But the fact of the matter is all our talk will come to null and void in all these areas of power unless we let loose the normal genius of the Indian entrepreneurial urge to create wealth and then to be able to have economic, military and technological power. So if you want to start with the fountainhead, it's not military, it's not diplomatic, it's not technology.
Yes, the animal spirits of the
It's the
entrepreneur.
economy,
Yeah.
I remember.
I would just add a bit to that we have a window now in the next 5 years. Because we had a China plus one opportunity, we were riding on it. Now we have a US plus one and a Europe plus one. Given the ferment in both these geographies, investors are looking for a more stable place and one that is welcoming of investments. So if we get our act together and become more attractive than we've been and less bureaucratic and so on,
It's an opportunity to say.
we have a huge US plus one opportunity. Because the Canadians, for instance, are saying, I want to get out of the US, where can I?
For all our ease of doing business, you talk to board member of any company,
Yeah.
80% of the time is spent on compliance and regulations, 20% on strategy. If your entire boards of normal companies are going to be spending money,
I have a little more fundamental concern. I don't remember how many years ago, the legendary P.L. Kirloskar, he was caught for FERA violations and he was put behind bars. There was a huge furore in Bombay, respected figure like P.L. Kirloskar. He was got out of the jail immediately with huge clamor in support of him. Very principled house of Kirloskar and the father of Kirloskar family. He then unleashed a series of advertising in the newspapers. His dream of an India. And one of the dreams of an India was, when I just remember those words because they've stuck in my mind ever since, I'm talking about 40 years ago perhaps. I dream of an India when making money is not a crime.
correct.
And that is still fundamental. If
So
you have declared 100 crores of profit, जब 100 crore का profit दिया तो 250-300 तो होएगा ही होएगा. I mean, that is the mindset with which you prove.
Mindset is everyone is a chore.
And we have to
That has to-
decriminalize, a lot of the white collar crimes,
Of
we
the
need
record,
to
I'm just paying my taxes.
decriminalize.
I wish.
That's the fundamental part. That
No, no,
wish
you're
that would
right.
have happened to me.
So until even Deng, I mean, for all China changed because he said it's not a sin to be rich.
No, but I think
Unless-
somewhere some change has happened. Little personal note: I built a farm, I built a house in Goa. God knows from where the income tax fellow says, "You never built it. You never built it. It's laundering money. You paid so much money to Mr. X. You've taken the money back from him. All his imagination."
Yeah.
So I tell my CA, I said, "Ye kya ho raha hai? Ye- What is he trying to say?"
Surely
He said, "We will ask for a video, what do you call it?
Zoom.
video
chat.
meeting,
No, chat, they call it.
video conference.
Video conferencing and video appeal. And we'll go into that appeal. I met at a college lunch, Arvind Singh, who was our Secretary Tourism till recently. His wife was CBDT chairman for a small bit of time. So she was also there. So I said, "Mr. Singh, this is very funny. That video call is my creation. Wait, it will deliver you results." So in that video conferencing, I was able to track, fortunately for me, all the process. Pehle, the neem is being done, so we've got pictures. Color paint ho raha hai. I'm standing in front, my son is standing somewhere. So we uploaded all these pictures. And this idiot was made to look such a fool because he actually questioned that there was no building made, there was no land, there was no nothing.
Because he must have caught one guy doing it and he assumes everyone is
No,
a
no,
Chopra.
but the bureaucracy
That-
is not only the normal, this is the petty bureaucracy which is ruining India. They are just run amok.
They've run amok.
Yeah.
And frankly, the level of, which we will edit afterward, but is of
Just cannot
the
go.
level of corruption at the lower levels
It's unbelievable.
is unbelievable.
Hasn't that changed?
Not at all.
The
Look,
argument
many
is that
things have
so
happened.
that
You
is
get your
technology,
in-
the retail corruption.
That
you
is
get your income tax refund now,
no, but
without your knowing it, you suddenly see credit in your account. So that major changes happen.
Exactly 5 years.
But if you go to an office for something, then
yeah,
you
yeah.
have-
So when you talk about how can India become competitive, one of the main issues you have to deal with is this
The law bureaucracy.
across the board corruption.
Across
It's,
the board.
there's a huge cost to that. You can't compete with a lot of Southeast Asian
eliminate
countries.
bureaucratic contact.
So what he said,
Yeah, so the touch points have to
competitiveness
go.
is productivity. If you can't produce
Yeah.
as
And
fast as the other guy,
And
you're
as
not
cheap as the other guy,
Finally, what
with the
is
quality
well-
of the other
It's
guy.
not the money, it is the goods and the services. If you don't have goods and services, the money in your pocket.
Also, you have to
is
deliver on
enormous.
per capita income, not on
Yeah.
not on
GDP.
overall GDP. That's meaningless.
Can we also say that somewhere I feel, and the nuances were there in our discussion, very strongly there, that you aren't yet that power that you
Of course.
Think you are.
think you are.
That-
You have
that's-
all the
that's the-
potential,
that's
it's
the
all
delusion
there,
that you-
but it's not there yet. And we'll have to work our way
We
towards it.
always
But
think
we have,
we have arrived when we are on the
Two
way.
decades of work still.
so
When others will also be growing.
Others will
And they
also be
will
moving.
AI powered growing.
Actually, one of my things is our greatest danger is our delusional mindsets on a whole
Yeah,
lot of things.
I agree with that.
And the rhetoric which emerges.
I'm telling you, 25 years ago on trade, where China was and where India was.
and I think we are
Fact.
wasting a lot of our national time and resource
Yeah, even
in discussing
I was
issues which
they were looking
don't add to
you were
my
there
growth.
when I joined.
Caste
There were hardly
care,
any Chinese.
The nice thing.
what's your surname, which religion are you? I think
Yeah.
Elections that way, on that.
I sent you that thing,
Desai,
na?
they
कि
basically
कुत्तों को आठ दिन
took
में
over Desai.
judgment मिल गई. We were talking about the judiciary. In 8 days, the dog got their justice. It takes 30 years for a poor chap to get
They have
something.
higher powers.
Harish, thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Uh,
Amazing.
I think we had a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you.